Hi, everybody. Welcome back. Number 13. And that means that this is the penultimate edition of Basic Training Family Edition. Our last episode will be next week. We will then replay the entire process. We're going to talk more about that next week. We're going to alter it a little bit, condense it some. We're going to get a lot of your input. And next week, we're going to be closing out with the family assessments and the knowledge tests. And we're going to do a lot of Q&A, and we're going to talk about some other things that we have in the works, and we're very excited about it. So again, welcome back. And as always, let me express my gratitude to Recovery Bootcamp for allowing us to host this place here, this webinar here, and the Schnellenberger Family Foundation, without whose generosity this would not be possible. The work that they're doing to help connect families to the disease is amazing, and I have deep and enduring gratitude to Coach Schnellenberger and Beverly, his wife, both of who are really instrumental in making this occur. And again, of course, thanks to all of you sticking through 13 weeks. If it was years, I'd buy you all bar mitzvah presents, but it's weeks. But that doesn't mean that it's not a valiant effort. And we have done a lot of work. We've talked about a lot of information. We started way back when, if you can remember, with the basic ideas of the disease model, the medical model. We expanded into the spiritual understanding through the recovery model in depth, all the way through the processes and stages of the client in their recovery as well as yours. We ended 2 weeks ago with the phases of the family's own process of recovery. And last week, we almost devoted the entire time to how to understand boundaries specifically. And today, we're going to get back into asserting boundaries. As you can see, it's our number one slide. We do have some slide derivations. First of all, I did add about 9 slides in the middle, most of which you didn't have in your workbook last week. We're going to have 2 more of those, which are not included in the workbook, and then I shuffled some around. So in essence, when we start on in 2 slides, what we're going to end up doing is we're going to be correlated to page 47 of the workbook, the last slide, but I'll tell you when we get to it. And now, as always, I would like to introduce my friend and colleague, the COO of Recovery Bootcamp, and my amazing executive producer, who just got married, Mazel Tov, last week, and it was awesome, Dave Zaif.
Woo! Woo! Hey guys, welcome back. Thanks for being here with us. We're really excited that one, we've been able to do this for so long and actually not have any real gross difficulties or handicaps. Technically, we've actually been able to produce this thing for over 3 months, which is a miracle in and of itself. And I want to thank Mark, one, for that nice introduction, and 2, for also being the rabbi that married me and my now wife. And hi, wife. Hi, mom. It was truly a special occasion. I apologize I wasn't here last week, but I had some last minute things to take care of, yada, yada, yada. Anyway, I'm back in action, ready to go. So don't want to take up too much time. If you are new, welcome. You've come in at the very end, which is, okay, because we're going to be doing this again. Plus, all of our past webinars are still available on our website. So if you guys look in your chat box, it's like a little sort of chat bubble on the side of your screens. You'll see that I've posted a link to all of our previous webinars, as well as a link to all the handouts, which are going to become pretty important for us next week, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so if you haven't, well, we'll get to that later. So if you want to look at the handouts, look at the webinars, I put links in there, as well as our director of admissions. His name is Nick Johnson. Great guy, easy to talk to. If you guys have admissions questions about this facility, if you have a loved one who's struggling and you just need someone to talk to about a plan, he's a great guy to talk to. He's always available. I put his phone number and his email address in there for you as well. 2 more things. We're going to have a Q&A at the end of this session. So as Rabbi Mark is talking throughout the webinar, if you guys do have questions, type them into your little question box there, send them to me. If it's logistics related, then I will do my best to answer it on the spot, try and work you through whatever issues you're having. If it is a question for Mark, I will do my best to get them to answer it live at the end of the session, and then the questions we can't get to, we will follow up, or Mark will follow up with an email next week. The last thing is we are going to be doing poll questions, and boy, do we have a lot of them tonight. Poll heavy webinar session. So that being said, would love it if you guys, as soon as the question pops up, read it, think about your answer, and lock it in as quickly as you can. The answers are anonymous, so you don't have to worry about someone seeing what you write down or which answer you choose. We just want to keep it moving so we can get Mark to talk about the results and move on to the next slide. So just answer them when you see the questions pop up. I think we have like 8 or 9 of them tonight, so there's going to be a decent amount of them. And that's all I got for you guys. It's great to be back. Enjoy the webinar.
Yay, Dave. Dave is awesome, and his wife is awesome. They're awesome. Who's awesome? Awesome. Okay. So I can't say awesome any more times, so it was fabulous. So here we go. Today we're going to begin with slide 140, as you can see, and we're going to go to 150. We're only going to do 10 slides today, so we're pretty heavy on the poll questions. And remember, just a quick review, last week we talked at length about developing boundaries, what they meant, what they are, how they work. Today, we're going to talk about how, when you formulate the boundary in your head, how do you assert it? What does asserting do? What does it mean to be assertive as opposed to aggressive? How do you have that boundary, a boundary within a boundary? And the next slide, we're actually going to give you a way to write those boundaries and formulate them. I personally am a big believer in having a script, especially when it's something important to be said, like an amends or a boundary or a discussion or even a small therapeutic intervention. Staying on script, staying on point, focusing. As you can plainly tell, I'm not so good at that. I'm a little circuitous in nature. But generally speaking, if you're trying to deliver a solid message in an important part of your life where there tends to be some conflict, you want to have some sort of script or guide. And so we're going to show you how to make statements and then how to assert those statements vocally as well. Got a little writing that you can do, which will help you out a lot. So let's jump right into the slide. So let's talk about asserting boundaries. So what do we do when we set boundaries? So setting boundaries are important. We have to set them. We have to manifest them, either written or verbally, and then we have to assert them and reinforce them. So there are really three stages. So when we are setting them in the development stage, as it were, we have to be very, very conscious to be specific. Specificity is hugely important because it allows us to have a safety area with the person we're engaged with, namely the identified patient. When they have very few boundaries and trying to spill over onto us, usually in a form of manipulation, we have to be the ones responsible to protect our own mental health in that encounter. Remember, we've said this numerous times, that mere proximity to the addict and alcoholic who is active taints you with the disease. It's the only single mental health problem that is in fact contagious. So we have to be very specific about what we desire. But we cannot be unreasonable. We have to be specific, yet it has to be within parameters of reasonability, because we can't make crazy, outlandish demands in those things. They have to be practical and pragmatic. The other thing that we must do is make that boundary enforceable. There has to be a way to validate the existence of that boundary and have some, I don't want to say punitive, but ramifications, either positive or negative, for the breaking or compliance with the boundary. So they have to be enforceable. One of the most important things in doing a boundary is before you start to give those boundaries to your identified patient, you need to discuss them and settle on them with the family that's going to use this boundary in unity to help them with dealing with the addict. And of course, you have to make it logical. It cannot be random and just off the, like you can only eat strawberries on Tuesday. That's the only boundary I have, because it's asinine and it makes no sense. And oddly enough, even in an inebriated active state, logic can penetrate to a certain extent, because their arguments against that logic, it'll dawn on them eventually that they're purely emotionally driven, that their arguments are part of their emotional ability because the logic is undefeatable. So they need to be logical. Okay. So we have to have reinforcing thoughts for ourselves in order to maintain these boundaries. So let me ask a question, and we'll put up a poll question. Are boundaries established to change others' behaviors or to control the identified patient? Yes or no? While you're answering, let me apologize. I made a boo-boo last week. Apparently, I forgot to put a no answer on one of the poll questions. So the only answer was yes, and I got in trouble.
The results are overwhelmingly positive.
They were, yeah.
100% said yes.
I would imagine so because there was no option. My bad. I'm sorry. 10-step example. I'm not sorry. I was wrong. I'm going to do my best to make sure it doesn't happen again. And I checked everyone tonight because I didn't want to look like a ding dong. To myself most. Oh, somebody did email me a little soundbite that we got to figure out how to get off the computer, which is for the waiting period.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
All right. Looks like the results are in.
And results are in. And so about 40% of you said it's yes, that really they're established to change others' behaviors, while the vast majority said no. And the vast majority is right yet again, because they are not, in fact, to alter someone else's behavior. We already know through the 3 C's of Al-Anon, I didn't cause it, I can't cure it, and I certainly cannot control it or control the active alcoholic or addict. So what I must remember is that boundaries are acts of self-care, not management of others. They are not attempt to change another person or to control their behavior. They are to give me a sense of comfort and ease, to establish serenity for myself, because I do not allow them to cross into that emotional space that's damaging for me. What's the next thought I have to remember? That I have to stop explaining and justifying my needs, because in essence, boundaries represent my needs for comfort and security. I don't have to explain that to someone who continually violates my comfort and security. I just need to establish the boundary. So I can't really get into that headset of like, well, is it too stringent? Is it too hard? I don't want to push them away. Remember, you can't make them relapse. They make that choice themselves. And they have to be aware that those choices come with repercussions. So you don't need to explain or justify your boundary. You need to understand that it's your boundary the way you want it, and that's how it needs to be. And in order to do that, you have to face those fears. I'm going to cause them to be upset. I don't want them to relapse. I don't want them to get emotionally more injured than they are. I get that. That's how we feel when we love someone. But the truth is that you have almost zero ability to help them if you remain sick. And remember, the best way to help them is for you to work on your own mental health issues that you have in essence caught from them, because that allows a sense of stability and continuity in recovery. Not only that, but by your own work in your own spiritual recovery development, you become an exemplar, a model of behavior that becomes attractive to them. And it also diminishes their opportunities for manipulation. So let go of that fear. It's huge. Here's the next thing you have to do. Be honest. That means not just in the boundary, but in owning your own things. This is how I feel. These are the problems I have. I own those, but I'm not willing to own yours. So I have to be honest about the parameters. And I have to also understand unequivocally that no is a complete sentence. It is not just a complete word. It is a complete sentence. Can I have $10, please? No. That's my boundary. I am not willing to give you money to help you kill yourself. I will not do that. I'll buy you food. I'll feed you. Sure. But I am not going to give you money so you can get high. No is a complete sentence. So let's move on to the next one. And this is the idea that if you feel guilty when you first set the boundary, it's okay to feel that way. You're going to feel that way because difference in behavior, listen, moving towards proactive work is seldom comfortable. All change has a distress incident or a pain incident induced by that change. And we have become comfortably uncomfortable with the status quo of being manipulated and in return using that emotional power as a bargaining chip. So what we have to do is understand that it is going to make us feel uncomfortable. And since we have been uncomfortable for a while, what our brain has started to associate is discomfort with feelings of guilt, that I'm not doing it right. So you will in fact feel guilty for asserting these boundaries and setting them initially. It's okay, feel it, but set the boundary anyway. It doesn't matter if you feel bad or guilty. That boundary is for you, and change is inherently uncomfortable. So now let's get into the next slide, and this is the writing assignment slide. So we are going back to the idea of asserting boundaries. So how do we assert the boundaries? Well, first, we have to have a discussion with the person that we're putting the boundary in front of. It's not a boundary on them or for them, it's your boundary in front of them. So a lot of times, in order to say that, to do this effectively, we have to state our emotional reality. We have to state the truth of ourselves in the moment. And in order to do this, we have to be very careful because addicts and alcoholics, even in recovery, tend to remain defiant above all else. And that sort of feeling of threat of like, oh, you're coming at me, you're hitting me with the old things, I'm trying to be better, is something that pushes them away. So we have to be very careful. This is basically the initial premise in every compassionate communication class, as well as anger management. The first thing you learn in anger management is how to make a statement about where you're at. And it goes something like this. I feel blank. What do I feel? I feel neglected. I feel minimized. I feel taken advantage of. I feel assaulted. I feel threatened. I feel unsafe and uncomfortable in my own house. When, what happens? Now, this is very important. You don't say when you do this, you describe the behavior objectively. When my house is entered without permission, when my wallet is gone through, I feel uncomfortable when I have to lock up my medications in a safe in my bathroom. Explain the circumstance specifically without directing a finger at somebody else. I feel blank when blank occurs. I prefer. I want. I need what? I need the behavior. Now you describe the behavior I'm acting for. I need to feel safe in my house, to not have people walk in. I need to feel that my neighborhood is safe, that there's not people lingering in a car that may not have my best interest at heart, that I don't have to lock up my wallet, that I don't have to hide my purse in my own house. What I need is to be able to feel comfortable in that environment. So you have to, in fact, describe the new behavior that you're asking for. Now, remember, make sure that you don't say you in the second section, and you don't say not when you're asking. You're not asking for something not to happen. You're asking for something to happen. I feel this when this occurs, and what I would prefer is for this to occur. Not, I would prefer that not occur, because you're actually reinforcing the negative behavior. So it's very important. If you follow this plan, it's a great way to talk to people to get them to possibly hear you better. You know, instead of saying, you know what, you really bug me, you make me crazy when you do this, this, and that. You need to say, I feel uncomfortable and threatened when my space is violated without a phone call. And I would prefer a heads up when I was going to have visitors. Simple. You don't want them banging on the door at 2 o'clock in the morning trying to get, I would prefer a phone call. That was it. Very simple, very concise, very practical, and very enforceable, which means that if you decide to come and bang on my door, I will not answer it. And 2 o'clock in the morning, I may actually call the police, just so you know. So that's how we write our initial feeling words to the person we're talking to. So then how do we set that boundary? Well, when we are ready to set the boundary, after we've understood our emotional reality in it, we write a secondary statement, and this is how it goes. I will describe what the specific action I will take. I will call the police if someone is banging on my door at 2 in the morning. I will do that. And now you can use you, because first you're not accusatory. You tell them how you feel. Then you tell them what you're going to do and what the repercussion is if they violate that boundary. If you specifically come to the house unannounced and bang on the door at 2 o'clock in the morning. So we keep it out of the finger pointing initially, but again, we are setting a boundary. And although the goal is not to control them, what we're saying is what we're going to do to be safe when their behavior crosses that line. So remember, we talk about the feelings initially in that example. I feel blank when blank happens, and I would prefer if blank happened. And I will institute this boundary if you do things that I feel uncomfortable with. This is a great formula, a great formula. Okay. And I missed a poll question.
I know.
Damn. Because I was going to ask, is there a great formula for setting boundaries? Yes, of course there is. I just gave it to you. Oh.
We got a poll question on the next slide.
We do. So you only got 8, not bad. Okay, so let's move on to conclusion. Now, this is where we switched up the slides. In your handbook, at this section, now I understand the last 9 slides were not even in the book because I added those in the interim, but what I did was I moved the family knowledge assessments down and moved the conclusionary slides up, okay? Because I wanted to put, at the very end, I wanted us to retake the assessments. Because remember, I encouraged everyone when they first came, and every time, to take that assessment test and look at it and score it for yourself. And that at the very end, we would do a comparative scoring to see how far we've come, right? Because change in interpersonal and spiritual and recovery-based development is so incremental that we can become discouraged, right? Because it's so incremental and so slight that really the only way for us to understand how far we've come in this process is to look back at where we were originally. And once we have that, we can feel a sense of accomplishment, feel a sense of doing what we need to do, right? And so starting with this slide, we're going to be in the workbook on page 47, the last slide, okay? So let's get into it. So what are we concluding? We're concluding the entire ideas. So we have to ask, what do we look for in the reactions with our family members or the identified patient? We have to look for things. We have to look for positive things as well as things that are pitfalls or negative. So let's start with the things that we find positive. What is the very first thing that we want to ask? Well, the first thing is simply, does our loved one accept their diagnosis? Are they fully invested in the fact that they have this disease and the severity of it and the nature of it and the fact that it's progressive and terminal and deadly? And the way we can see whether that's true for them, and remember, this is all in the context of setting boundaries and understanding growth, because we're going to adjust our boundaries as our loved ones become healthier, right? So what is the major signs to look for is that there is no minimization, that people go, yeah, it wasn't that bad, it wasn't so difficult, right? There's no minimization of their problems. They don't think, oh, you know what, it's like it was easy, you know, it wasn't that horrible, because the mind tends to forget the trauma, especially when I am the inflictor of trauma. That's the last thing I want to remember, is how badly I acted towards the people I love. Now that I'm changed and they're actually starting to have reciprocal love that's the way it used to be, it's organic for me or natural for me to minimize those things. No minimizing. The second thing that's very important to look for is whether they have left the debating society. If in my interaction with that person, is there constantly a debate or somewhat of a tension-filled dialogue? If that still exists, that means that they are still resistant to understanding, to owning the fact that they really have done this. That they, like I said, it's not their fault that they're an addict. It is their responsibility to get better. And part of that getting better is having responsibility for the things that they did, not the disease itself. The things that the disease may have exacerbated them, diminished their mental and ethical and moral capacity, which allowed them to do it, yet it's still theirs. They have to own responsibility for the actions, regardless of whether initially they were their fault or not. And we know they weren't. And then thirdly, on this idea, we have to look at rationalizations. When rationalizations and circular arguments diminish, it is a definite sign of progression and growth for the identified patient, almost consistently. So let's ask a poll question right now. Right, Dave? Okay, so here's one. Is there a difference?
There's a little typo.
Is there a difference? I forgot an R, I can't really type, between compliance and amenability. I totally didn't catch that.
Maybe.
I missed an R. Is the difference between compliance and amenability? At least I didn't forget to put the no in there. That's huge. We having responses?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
A clear majority.
Awesome. Well, other than the dead giveaway that they're two different words, you know, there's that.
All right, closing the polls.
Closing the polls. Yes, 94%. 6% say no. Well, yes, there is absolutely a difference between amenability and compliance. And in fact, it goes like this. It is in our attitude towards recovery. Initially, we are compliant. We comply to circumstances and situations, generally external, that force us into a surrender. It's not that we are desirous of a sober life. It's that we are undesirous of the complete shit show that our life has become up until this point. We talked about this earlier in the session. It's a Hobson's choice. You think you have a choice, but you really don't. In essence, the circumstances forced you. So initially you're compliant, and you're compliant because you have to. You're doing it because in essence you're forced by circumstance, by situation, by a drug, by a judge, by your family. All these things have forced you into that. Nobody chooses to get sober if they don't know what that is, but they choose not to have the miserable life of being loaded. So initially it's compliance, which is an external commitment. That changes. Once we start to do the work, we move towards that idea of amenability, where all of a sudden I start having some of the benefits. I get a taste of sobriety. I get a taste of true intimate relationships with my peers. One of the beautiful things about Recovery Boot Camp is these men are truly united to the point where they bring each other up, and when people get out of line, they pull those covers. I hear this question all the time between men that live here. What's really going on? Because you've been acting weird. The last couple of days, you just haven't seemed right. What's really going on? They pull each other's covers. And what happens is because they want to see each other succeed, which means that they succeed. So they start off by doing it because they have to. They end up doing it because they have results. And they like those results. I like the fact that there are people that care enough about me without any kind of transactional contract. It's just because we're in the same boat, we have the same background, and we're trying to strive for the same goal that we actually support each other. And I find that that happens in environments that are same sex more than co-ed ones. I mean, it happens in co-ed environments as well, don't get me wrong, but I find that the bonds that occur without the distractions of the opposite sex in a facility are really, really strong because we know each other, and that's the key, right? So let's move on to the next slide. Again, what do we look for in our interactions with this patient? Well, let's talk about something that's very important: insight and judgment. And I think this is a perfect time for another poll question. So here's the question: what is the difference, or is there a difference, between self-will and free will? Got a lot of poll questions.
All right, a lot of answers coming in quick.
Coming in hot.
Coming in hot. All right.
Let's hear it.
Here come the answers.
Yes, awesome. You guys are learning like you wouldn't believe. You're on learning fire. 88% say yes, and you are absolutely correct. There is insight and judgment. The way we see how they're progressing and maturing, we understand. Oops, got to click the clicky. We understand that it is not self-will driven. Much like the Hobson's choice of commitment, self-will are decisions predicated on self. And initially, my knowledge of self on a true, intimate, deep, authentic level is minuscule, which means that I'm operating under fraudulent premises, delusions, and denials, which means that that bad information is going to make me make bad choices consistently. And those choices are pretty much predetermined because I'm reacting to the situation and circumstances that are around me. Much like compliance, self-will is really removes from me the ability to make an informed choice, right? So what we're really looking for is that free will driven decisions are occurring. And what is freedom? Well, freedom is autonomous. It's autonomy. It's not fettered by delusions and denials and clouded by nonsense that we believe that's not even true. Most specifically, there is not judgmentalism involved. Now, this is where the distinction lies. A free will choice is inherently a judgment predicated on the facts that I've acquired that allow me to make an informed choice. Whereas judgmentalism is generally thinking that I know the facts, when in fact it is preconceived notions that I am projecting on people or events. And that is a reactionary approach, which is why I live that way in self-will. Free will, on the other hand, has no judgmentalism in it. There are no preconceived notions that are misplaced or incorrect. And it is solely based on true informed judgment. We have these conflicts all the time in 12-step programs. You hear, judge not, but stick with the winners. Well, Judge not means don't be judgmental of people in the rooms without knowing them or hearing their story, looking at the way they look or seeing the way they act with small foibles and immediately casting a dispersion on their character in your own brain. No, you judge them by the preponderance of their behavior, by their action. You use that information to decide whether this person has something you want. And that's how you find the winners. These things are not inherently in conflict. They are not at all. Let's move on to the next slide. What else am I looking for in those interactions? Well, one of my very important markers to see how this person is progressing, and again, all of these things are reflections on your own recovery. You can hold yourself to these standards as well. How is my relationship to others developing? Is it based on internal instead of external realities? Is my relationship based on what I can get from you, or some contractual agreement that I have, or a manipulation, or am I looking for just to get something emotionally from you, right? It's based on intellect and feeling, integrated. I'm not solely emotionally driven, and I'm not solely in rationalizations and manipulations. My brain and intellect is integrated with my feeling in a semblance of balance or centralist kind of idea, and in doing so, I'm well-rounded. It's not about stuff, and it's not about acquisition. It's not about what I can get from you. And in fact, I have changed my perspective because I am no longer focused on image, what I think you think about me. I'm worried about my essence, which is who I am based on my actions and my consciousness. When those things, when I travel from here to here and I become holistic, W-H-O-L-E in my reality, I am more concerned about my being than what that being looks like, because I've come to realize that I don't really need validation from you. My validation comes from my sense of esteem, which is developed by my esteemable acts, not what I think you think about me. How is my relationship with the family progressing? It's another marker. How is your relationships within the family progressing, right? Are they based on needs, what is best for the community, unity at large, or are they based on wants? And do I convolute and conflate my wants and my needs? I don't have false rationalized needs. I spent years trying to convince myself that I needed what I actually wanted and that I didn't want what I actually needed. And this is what when those things become actually together, that's when we have progress, both as the family and as the identified patient. The next thing that we're going to look for is spiritual development. Okay, this is a huge, huge, huge part. And it involves a self-defining spiritual path.
2 poll questions.
We have two. We have two on this page. And the first poll question, because we're talking about this self-defining spiritual path, let's put this one up. Is there a difference between spirituality and religion? And we talked about this prior, and we mentioned it earlier, a few weeks back. Is it a mixed bag?
No.
No.
Strong majority.
Good. Good, good, good. I remember giving the definition of spirituality from the OED at least twice in the last 13 months.
All right, closing the poll.
Close the poll. Yes, absolutely. There is inherently a difference between spirituality and religion. One of the great teachers who I have met a few times, a guy named Rabbi Twersky, started a treatment center in Pittsburgh called Gateways years and years ago, maybe 30 years ago. He's a prolific scholar and a voluminous writer. And I've seen him lecture a few times, and he always starts off, he comes out and he says, you don't have to be religious to be spiritual. However, if you travel the spiritual path, questions will eventually arise that can only be answered or reconciled with religious ideas. I'll leave it at that. There is absolutely a difference. And what we have to do is become aware of that distinction between spiritual and religious. And why is this important? Not just for the patient, but for us as family members. Because what I have seen numerous times is that people can get wrapped up in religious fervor in early recovery and not even allow the spiritual to develop to bolster the religious fervor, to have that response, and they can convolute religious passion with spiritual enlightenment. And unfortunately, it's almost kind of like a semi-addictive pathology again. They're going for the ecstatic thing. There's this thing in this ancient quote in the Talmud, and it talks about the difference. It's similar to religion and spirituality. It says the difference between spiritual pursuit and religious pursuit is that deep religious pursuit is me attempting to live in an altered state of consciousness, which passionate religion is great, but that becoming the entire drive is almost addictive in nature. I want to leave here and live there. Whereas the spiritual pursuit is not attempting to live in an altered state of consciousness. It's attempting to alter the consciousness in the state of which I live, which means that I bring those ideas back to here, to a pragmatic reality. And understanding that distinction is huge marker for understanding growth of both your own recovery and the identified patient. So let's move on to the next stage, the next idea, which is the attitude toward 12-step work and the fellowship and the society of those 12 steps, because they are in fact societies. AA is a true anarchy, right? And they are comprised of 3 legacies. Many of us have seen the circle with the triangle, and they represent the 3 legacies of recovery. And so let's throw out, I'll give you a hint what those are. I'll just tell you, the bottom of the triangle says recovery. On the one side, it says unity. On the other side, it says service. So here's the poll question. Is there a specific goal for each of those 3 legacies? Right? The name of them may not actually be the goal. I wonder if they can hear me drinking water every time the poll question comes up. All right, let's see it. Yes, 94. You guys are getting better by the second. Absolutely correct. There is, in fact. So, and these 3 legacies are recovery, which is guided by the steps, unity, which is guided by the 12 traditions, and service, which is guided by the 12 concepts of world service. So let me explain a little bit about these. What, in essence, what are these specific goals for each of these 3? Well, the steps are for internal spiritual development. They teach me how to not murder myself, either quickly or slowly, how to come to a state of authenticity and self-love, internal spiritual development. The traditions, which are suggestions for governing a group, but a group is just a bunch of people. So in reality, for me to foster unity, I have to sacrifice my petty needs in order to better the group, and then the group benefits me in the long run, which means those traditions are actually guides to interpersonal spiritual development. And finally, service, which is guided by the concepts. The concepts are ways for me to direct my growth and attention to what is called transpersonal spiritual development, or true charity and service, right? You know, in the Mishnah, Jewish text, there's a thing that says, Al Shlosha Devarim Olam Hamed. On three things the world stands: on Torah, which is self-development; on Avodah, which is service; and acts of loving kindness. It's very similar. It's the same type of triangle. The work, the book, and the work gives me the internal reality. The group and the fellowship and my sacrifices to it show me how to be interpersonal relationships. And then finally, the concepts show me how to be of loving kindness and service to all, right? So the steps tell me how not to suicide. Traditions tell me how not to homicide. And the concepts tell me how to heal the world. So let's move on to the next one. What to look for again in your reactions with the identified patient. Self-forgiveness. This is huge. It is hopefully the result of a thorough 9th step. I start in the 4th step of just deconstructing the lies and fallacies I've told myself, understanding my own motivations and culpabilities. I start to crack the shame that keeps me in the cycle of that behavior and understand guilt. And I eventually end up, after the 9th step, before 10, 11, and 12, in a state of self-forgiveness, after fixing the things I've broken. And I have the ability to rectify those wrongs and those mistakes by fixing those things. And I have the ability, by fixing those things, to recognize that I am human, not bad. I'm human who has a disease and who made mistakes and was wrong. And I don't want to be wrong because I find those behaviors and techniques objectionable, and I don't want to live them anymore. I then start to engage in responsibility, and I accept the truth of my past, that I am responsible for those things, and I engage in my obligations for the future. This is the key. And what happens there is I start to develop a real sense of maturity. I no longer want to be treated like an adult and act like a child. I recognize that in order to be treated like an adult, I have to engage in consistent and linear adult behavior, things that are esteemable, decent, and proactive. So now let's get some negative ideas. And this is where we can see things that can block people in recovery, and we can even block ourselves. This is a little bit more focused on the patient. So what are some areas of concern? Well, the first one is boredom. We find that addicts, oh, recovery is so boring, it's boring. Well, you know what? It's not. Being dope sick in the morning, trying to do a hustle to get enough dope to not be sick, then to do another hustle to get high, and then to pass out at night and do the exact same thing every day for years, that's boring. When I'm getting loaded, the only variable in my life is, am I going to get burned, am I going to get arrested, or am I going to get shot? That's it. There are no other variables. This is, oh, see, startled. You didn't know that was going to happen. Nothing's boring because you never know what's going to happen when you're conscious and aware. And why is that? Because only boring people are bored. That's it. If you're bored, you're kind of boring, just so you know. People that have interest in in-depth thoughts and the capacity to work even when they're not working, to be still with themselves, to not isolate, but have alone time with their creator. These people are not bored. One of the other stumbling blocks that we always see is the need for constant distractions. I just won't get loaded if I got something to distract me, right? If you can sit at a bus bench and just be and not be bored, you've got some. But if you need to be on your phone or texting or swiping or I don't even know what it is, right? And we can find this. It's actually what's called a transference to soft addiction. And we see this all the time. Number one, working out to excess. Hours in the gym. Well, if I'm physically fit, I'm going to be good. I'm going to be healthy. My neurochemistry will respond. Yes, but we can use it as a secondary soft addiction, transferring constant distraction, not allowing to do it. Obsessive video gaming is a huge one. Crazy sports all the time, all the time, all the time. Gambling, hugely detrimental. Chasing relationships for sex, for validation, same thing. Constant need. These are warning areas. If you see this becoming a priority, you have to be careful. What's another possible stumbling block or area of concern that we have? Well, let's find out by asking a poll question. What do you say? Should we do that?
I say let's go.
All right, let's go for it. So here's a simple poll question. One of the stumbling blocks is always fear, obviously. So here's the question. Are the majority of addicts, are most addicts afraid of failure? That's a real question, because that could be a huge stumbling block. How many questions do we have?
Left? Oh, we have a bunch.
Do we? Good.
And the same consensus is that yes, they can hear you swallow your water.
Awesome. I like that. Technology is awesome. I figured you couldn't see me, so it would go weird. Maybe I'm a loud swallower.
All right.
All right.
Still pretty solid, not as unanimous as the last. But pretty.
Yes is 74. So 3/4 of you say they're afraid of failure, and 26%, a quarter of you say they're not. Well, 26% has it. Addicts are generally not afraid of failure. They're kind of afraid of success. Let me tell you why. Fear at its core comes from an unknown, the nature of the unknown. Most addicts, they may be uncomfortable with failure, but they're not afraid of it because they know exactly what it feels like. Because most addicts who have been using for a substantial amount of time are really successful at failing. They know exactly what to expect. It's part of their boring cycle of repetitive reality. Failure, 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 deconstruction, self-hatred, failure. It is, in fact, a self-fulfilling prophecy of doom. They're not afraid of failure. They understand they have experienced it so long that consciously and subconsciously they start to believe that maybe that's all they deserve, and then sabotage themselves when they're doing good. And we can notice the signs of this by a lot of complaining. When complaining starts to happen, that means that they are uncomfortable with the success they're having, and they're losing gratitude behind it. They start to think that they're the sole reason for it, and how could that be? Because they're really not nice people, which is a lie. They start whining, and they fall back in that desire to be taken care of like a child, but treated like an adult. These are the precursors for self-fulfilling prophecies of failure and doom, right? Because we are afraid of success, because our experience with long-term protracted success is minimal. What we have to do is start to love ourselves and forgive ourselves to the point of understanding that we deserve the success we work for, and we can keep it. What is another area of concern? Relationships, specifically sexual ones or romantic attachments, because of the time and effort that's involved in that versus the reward. And what is the reward? Sometimes I just want validation. Maybe I can love myself if just somebody else will love me. Well, here's the truth. If I'm not the man I want to be, trust me, my standard's up here and I don't even meet it. But if someone loves me, right, that means that I meet their standard. So obviously my standard's up here and I don't meet it, but their standard I meet, so their standard's obviously lower than mine, right? Obvious. So I'm getting validation from someone who has a lower standard than me, but it makes me feel some sort of way, right? Sometimes it's solely for conquest and sex, another distraction. If I can just get out of myself for those 5 minutes, right? And sometimes it's for image. If I don't have somebody on my arm, what am I going to look like? These are all warning signs and areas. What's another major problem or stumbling block is fantasy. So let's ask another question, because fantasies are hugely, hugely interesting. So, do you think that most addicts fantasize about being normal? Normal people. I only missed one, huh?
Yeah, not bad, dude.
Good. I got very excited in the second slide. Got worked up.
I hear you, man. It happens to the best of us.
I know.
You were not afraid to fail that second poll question, I'll tell you that.
I was not. I was completely engaged in that failure. Felt sort of comfortable. Nostalgic, if you will. What is this thing? Look at it every week. I don't even know.
Well, the results are in.
Okay, let's hear them.
They are a doozy.
Damn! 50-50. Wow. It's odd that that should be 50-50 because the true answer is yes and no. It's bizarre. So when we get sober, we entertain fantasies of just being normal guys, regular guys. Yet here is the twisted idea. I started getting loaded. A lot of it had to do with not wanting to be normal. I mean, I remember, yuppie, I don't want to go to a cubicle and carry my briefcase and I want to be like an artist or a this or a that. And you don't understand, man. I like to skate and I'm different than the normal guy. And who wants to be a normie? It's horrible. I started getting loaded to be subcultural. And all I wanted to do was be exceptional and different. An anarchist throwing a beer bottle at a minibus going, anarchy! Yeah, well, that's what I wanted. But what happened is I became different. I fit into a really subculture of degenerates and people that are self-sabotaging. And now that I get sober, the only thing I want to be is be like a normal guy on the Budweiser commercial that's water skiing and having a few beers, and it's not a big deal. So my initial desire, so you're both right. I don't want to be normal and I want to be normal. And this is how twisted what we call euphoric recall is. And a lot of it is deeply rooted in nostalgia. Let me explain to you. So every Christmas time, I'm watching television, and I'm fairly sure every single one of you has seen that Corona commercial where it's a attractive guy and an attractive girl sitting in Adirondack chairs on some beach in the Caribbean with a bucket of 4 Coronas in between. My first thought is like, who drinks 4 beers? That's just alcohol abuse. And then there's a palm tree with Christmas lights on it and they twinkle on it and it says Corona. And every time I see that commercial, my first thought is, those were the good old days. Oh my God, I miss that. Well, let's be frank. I was never on an island in the Caribbean in an Adirondack chair, looking that good ever, drinking 4 Coronas at Christmas. Never happened. What makes me an alcoholic and the twist of my mental weirdness is that I have fond memories about things that never actually happened. I'm having euphoric recall about shit that never occurred. That's why I'm alcoholic. That's why I'm in conflict of wanting to be a normal guy and wanting to be exceptional at the same time. I don't think that'll ever change, right? But when I delve into those fantasies continuously, this is a very dangerous area for me because it can lead to false recollection of false projections and put me in a place I don't want to be. And finally, the most devastating thing to continued recovery is the reemergence of the ego. Understanding that it's all you. I did it all. We have a little saying, ego, edging God out, taking credit for all the things that the universe has conspired to put in my path because I did some footwork, right? Get into this, dude, I'm killing my recovery. It's awesome. I'm a sober giant. I'm a spiritual, amazing guy, right? I have no healthy prudence. I think I'm untouchable. I can't be toppled. My spiritual tenor is super high. I don't have prudence. Healthy prudence is very important. Bill Wilson in his later writings describes prudence, especially when he talks about the concepts of world service and how we keep the society afloat. He says that prudence is concern without worry, right? Vigilance and understanding in an intellectual way. I'm so awesome now that I'm sober. Everything is fixed. I don't got to take care of anything. I don't even got to do a 4-step. Man, drinking was my only problem. All I got to do is be sober. I'm an amazing guy, right? I overcompensate for low self-esteem because I don't feel that I'm that sober. Deep down inside, I feel like a fraud. And so I overcompensate by telling everybody. And then one of the biggest things that's problematic is I want you to give me an attaboy. Give me an attaboy for not doing the wrong thing. Come on. I didn't steal. I didn't rob your money. I didn't lie to you. I didn't crash your car today. Tell me how amazing I am for doing that. These are all warning signs. It's the ego trying to reconcile that I'm just like neutral, and that's awesome. And it's normal for me to understand it because I spent so many years being unawesome, right? But when I project that on my family and I want them to give me accolades for just not doing the wrong thing, it's a problem. Because really, what we do is we support each other. The men at Recovery Boot Camp encourage each other because they understand how hard it is not to do the wrong thing. And so we give each other accolades and attaboys because we understand that. But when I demand them from the rest of the world, thinking that I'm special because I've come from being a complete ass to being an okey doke guy, that's not right. And that's my ego. So let's move on to the very last slide where we're going to end today. We're actually going to end just with this header, but we're going to ask one last poll question, are we not? And here it is. Have I downloaded and answered the family knowledge assessments? It's just that simple of a question. If you could see me, I'm wagging my finger.
And about to drink some water.
Yeah, so expect a gulp, because here it comes.
By the way, Stan just wrote in and said, my ego is not my amigo.
There you go.
I like that.
My ego is not my amigo. Way to go, Stan.
All right.
Again, simple question. Have I downloaded and answered the assessments? Be honest. First step.
And also, if you guys haven't, it's okay. If you go in your chat box, you'll see the link I posted to download them all.
Right.
They're all on our website. So even if you just go to our website without a link and go to the basic training tab, you'll be able to see all of the handouts.
Right. Because we're not trying to like shake our finger at you. We just want to see how many of you have done it so we can have a good comparative analysis when we ask these questions next week. Ooh, only 28%. Ooh, I feel the urge to wag my finger at somebody, but
well,
I'm
they
not.
Can't see you right now,
Okay.
so get the wagging out.
All right, no wagging. I'm not going to wag.
All right, so let's make you full screen.
So basically, please download those things and take those assessments. And we're going to go over them next week in depth, right? Because they really understand, it's a good way to judge how you are in terms of enmeshment and engagement and codependency as well as enabling.
All right.
You mean move, Dave?
No.
No. I don't even know how that works. Would you just drag that sucker?
Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome.
All right, so
questions.
Got a couple questions.
Awesome.
And I know we ran a little over to get to that slide, so we'll get to a few, but fear not, if we don't hit them tonight, we will get to them soon. All right, so first question. This is in regards to your formula for boundaries and some of the advice you gave.
Correct.
How to not say you,
right?
Okay, but be more objective. It says, even when you are using those tools and are not being accusatory and your loved ones still become defensive and angry, then how do you handle that?
Then you have a boundary about setting the boundaries. And what you say is, I am not going to engage in conversation when I am taken for granted and treated improperly. So this conversation is over. I need this conversation to end, and I need you to leave. That's how you do it. You have to have that short boundary for when your boundaries get crossed, assessing a boundary. It's an interesting thing. I get it. It happens all the time. But if you reassess, remember we talked about consistency. Practice doesn't make perfect, it makes progress. And if we practice those boundaries over and over and over again continuously, we will start to see results, even if not from the person we're assessing them on, but from ourselves in the way we react to them. And that's what's most important, right? That's what we're looking for, to make ourselves comfortable, not to change their behavior. And you say, listen, this is an untenable situation. We are no longer going to have this conversation. I need you to leave. That's it. You have to be strong.
Okay, so in regards to also setting boundaries, do you do this only when they are clean and sober? Because the fear is when they're high, they're not rational. So how do we set a boundary with someone that might be irrational? And is it okay to call the police on your own child?
Oh yeah, sure it is. If your physical or mental well-being is at risk, it is absolutely okay to call the police on your child. And in fact, in my experience professionally, which is 17 years of doing this, I can tell you that legal interventions are hugely effective in getting people into treatment. Like at least getting them detoxed when they're locked up. Listen, you're going to kick on a metal cot in county jail for 48 hours over the weekend. Trust me, you're going to feel that. You're going to remember that. That soft glove, oh, let's get you some drugs and detox you all nicey nice. It is what it is, but trust me, you're going to remember like having big dudes like push you around when you're sick, and that may be a motivator. Trust me, it's quite effective. On top of that, we know nationally that, let me answer this part, then we'll get back to the beginning, that nationally, the statistics for long-term recovery, that when they have secondary and tertiary requirements, usually legal, the motivation to stay sober initially is a lot stronger, and they tend to go longer term in recovery. So can you exert boundaries with people that are inebriated? Absolutely. You exert them, you exert them, you exert them. Try not to yell them. Try not to get aggressive, but have them have different boundaries. Have more de facto boundaries. You're not coming to my house loaded. End of story. You show up, you keep banging on the door, I'm gonna call the cops. That's the boundary. A lot of times they have to be a tad more brutal, but no less, a little bit more aggressive, but definitely assertive. And complex boundaries, trying to assess complex boundaries when somebody's getting loaded or difficult, they have to be basic and simple and firm. That's the key. And yes, boundaries absolutely work when people are getting loaded. I'm not giving you money. You're not coming to my house. That's just the way things are going to be.
Yeah. Okay. I just got a note that a couple people are having a hard time hearing me ask the question.
Okay, I will repeat the question.
Beautiful, thank you. Okay. What to ask next, man, it's tough to pick. I know, okay, so you mentioned the relationships, towards the end, you were talking about sexual intimacy and relationships.
Mm-hmm.
How long should an addict wait in recovery, like if it's a child? When should I feel okay with them getting into a relationship in sobriety? Is there a length of time that's standard, or what does it really come down to?
Okay, so the question is, people new in recovery, we talked about like not diverting with sexual relationships. So the question is there a standard time? How long should it be? When should I be concerned that my child is getting into a relationship in early recovery? So there is no set standard. We hear a lot of times in the rooms of AA, NA, CA, things like this, you know, no major changes in a year, probably shouldn't get into a relationship in a year. And it's, you know, it's rule of thumb, I guess, or just I don't know, it's become a small T tradition. It's not really listed in any of the conference approved literature from any of the fellowships that I know. But generally speaking, there's a kind of a real kind of a addressment. So here's the thing. It's hard for me to have intimacy even with other men in a surrounding like recovery boot camp where I live with them in close proximity until I've really done a thorough fourth and fifth step. Because until I shatter a lot of the delusions or deconstruct these fraudulent ideas that I've been operating under, what I'm sharing with any other individual is possibly delusional, denial-based, and outright manipulation, at the very fraudulent, or at the very least an obfuscation of who I am. In other words, it's not totally the truth of me. So even if it's not malicious, I'm sharing things with you that are fraudulent or misinformed, which means I am incapable of giving you my truth. And then, so that means that the relationship is going to start on a footing that is not completely transparent and authentic, right? Whether it's malicious or not doesn't matter. So really, even to have interpersonal relationships that are deep and strong, even platonic amongst men in a community, those things really start to blossom after a fourth and fifth step. However, understand that we talked about this kind of pathology to the ninth step of self-forgiveness. Really, I personally believe that no one should be involved in an emotionally invested sexual relationship until they are well into their ninth step. Because until they really have started to fix the things they broke and start to feel their own validity through that, there's still always going to be that desire to get validated from someone else. Now, if I had ultimate druthers and could write the law on this, I would do it like this. I would say that a interpersonal sexual or romantic relationship should not be getting into, not even until you're done with your 12th step, but not until you have taken someone else at least into their 9th step. Because understanding the obligation you're having another person's emotional state in your hands, having obligation or responsibility for the unity and commitment that's involved in that relationship, the template for that is really, really good when you take another man through the steps, when you take another person through the steps. You can't get them sober and you can't keep them from getting loaded, but what you can do is share, and it starts to inculcate and teach us in a way the value of other lives and that we are in fact our brother's keeper. And understanding that is probably the key to any healthy relationship because they're covenantal. Most relationships, if done well, if correct, are covenantal in nature. There is a certain sort of non-summativity where I bring my identity, they bring their identity. Together, there's the relationship has an identity, and we both have responsibility and obligation to that unit. And really helping someone else through the steps is a good way to develop a template for that reality. Yeah, so like if they made me emperor, that's what I would say, pretty much.
So I think we're not going to do any more questions, but the one thing I do want to do is there have been a lot of people requesting just to look at the boundary formula again, since it's not
Sure.
in the handbook.
Let's go back.
So I think that I will share the screen again, and we'll just go back to slide 142 or 141. I've got it.
You got it? There you go.
Okay.
If you do a screenshot of it, you could probably.
It might be small if they're on their phones, but you want to just run through it again real
Sure.
super quick?
Okay.
So anybody that was asking about the boundaries and the formula,
All right, so
Listen up,
for those of
here
you
it
that are
comes.
asking about the boundaries and the formula, to see it again, how to write these. Now, these will be in the next downloadable format, correct?
yeah, we're working on
We're
getting them
working
in the
on it.
handbook,
All
but
right, I added them in the middle of the process because I had some kind of weird inspiration. So here it is. We can see it again. The first one, the example of how to assess the boundary is, this is the statement. I feel blank when blank happens. I would prefer, or I need, or I want blank to happen. Don't say no. Don't use not, right? So I feel minimized and discounted when you don't listen to when my words are not heard in conversation. And I would prefer talking to an attentive person. Not that, no, that you're not listening. I would prefer that you not listen. I would prefer that someone is an attentive person. And I will cease having discussions with you and cease having interactions if you continue to ignore my feelings. So the first is the statement of truth and feeling. The second is the manifestation of the boundary. This is what's going to happen if the boundary is not followed. I feel minimized when my feelings are not heard, when my words are taken for granted. And I would prefer, in fact, I need to be heard. And I will discontinue engagement with you if you continue to ignore what I say. Perfect, simple boundary, just like that.
nice. Okay. So I think that's all we got. Running out of time. So we'll work on getting those extra slides added in. Maybe we'll figure out a way to get them in there. In the meantime, you guys will always be able to go onto our website and re-watch this webinar. And you can pause it on the boundary slides and, watch it over and over again if you want to, just to practice. Feel free.
Awesome. So let's just close by again. You can, try to take a screenshot, look it up. We'll have it up. But thank you all for coming. Thanks for your commitment and diligence in this process. Thanks to Recovery Boot Camp for their generosity, and the Schnellenberger Family Foundation and the coach and Coach Howard and Beverly for enabling this to occur. And a shout out to my wife, who I love dearly. Carolyn, how are you? I'll see you in a little while. And Mazel tov to Dave's mom, and hi Katrina. And
Before we go, next week is assessment week.
Next week is assessment week.
So
please download and fill out those assessments, right? It's yes or no questions. There's a scorecard. It tells you where you're at. And if you've been with us from the beginning, you should be able to mark your progress. But these are also really effective as a guideline for kind of what not to do, right? We like to teach you what to do, but sometimes what not to do is pretty effective too. Thank you all for being here. We love you, and we'll see you next week.